question. I believe that children are created by God and conceived by parents, and they are not made by the state. Therefore, our children's minds are not the property of the state. So when I talk about education, I am talking about getting our children educated, and it is a parental choice on how they choose to have that child educated. If the parents want to choose public schools, great. And the small communities, that's really the only choice other than homeschooling. But if you're in a community that has a private school, the parents should have a choice whether to send public school, private school, or whether to homeschool. And it's surprising, I just read an article the other day that homeschooling is the fastest form. It's doubled in the last 5 years because parents are just tired of sending their children to schools that are failing. They're not educating and they're not teaching. Now, not all schools are that way. I received a very fine education in Lorenz Marathon, and I'm proud of Lorenz Marathon School. So I don't want to paint every public school with a broad brush, but we have definite problems within our public school system. And so my focus is getting the dollars into the classroom, not expanding the administration and the bureaucracy of education.
Susan?
Well, I would say education is absolutely the backbone of our society, and we need to keep a good, strong public education. And I think Iowa does a better job than most states for doing that, and it's been wonderful traveling through this district. And one of the things that I have so enjoyed in meeting people is to hear the success stories of our Iowan children. It is so impressive. A gentleman from Pocahontas that I just talked to last week was telling me about his son majoring in biochemistry and going on and working for a big corporation. Graduated from Pocahontas High School. One of my in the district down by Thor, I was visiting with a woman whose grandson graduated from Eagle Grove, but they were living in Thor, and he's going to West Point. I guess I'm so impressed with the quality of education that we have in Iowa and want to keep that strong and do as much as we can to support that. Now, I'm not against homeschool. If that's a person's choice, they certainly have that right, and same with private school, which, by the way, we allow quite generous deductions on income tax for people that are going to private school. But I just don't think the state should be subsidizing, a homeschool program.
I don't know how much subsidizing you have to do. You realize with $400 or $500 worth of books, parents homeschool their children.
Okay. The next question comes from, it's actually my own. I'll look down the sheet just a little bit. Former Governor Branstad has recommended removing state funding for early childhood education programs. Totals about $37 million annually. Instead, he favors shifting to public, private, and faith-based preschool services. The schools in District 8 have small enrollments and are dependent upon state funding to largely cover the cost of a certified preschool with professional instructors. Do you support Mr. Branstad's approach? And how can rural districts still provide their current early education services if the state funding is significantly cut or eliminated altogether? Susan?
I couldn't disagree with Terry Branstad more. And if I'm correct, that actually the impetus for a 4-year-old preschool was initiated by our business leaders and leaders in industry, because they were concerned that our educated workforce isn't getting educated good enough, that we needed to start with children needed to start in kindergarten with stronger skills than we traditionally did. And they suggested 4-year-old preschool. And I don't know who all was involved in getting that started, but I think that's wonderful from an industry point of view that we are attempting to do that. But I also think it's the right thing to do as citizens. It's my understanding that approximately 1/3 of 4-year-old kids can't afford to go to preschool and are falling between the cracks with our private-based preschools. I know there's scholarships out there, and I was very sad to see our church preschool for 4-year-olds had to close. And so I understand that side, but not everyone was being served. And there's such a vast discrepancy between preschools that some were getting equality, some were not. And so that was a solution. It's still totally optional. It's not mandatory. But I certainly am for funding 4-year-old preschool.
You look like you would like a response to that.
I certainly have nothing against preschool. I'm for as much education as anybody can receive. We all want quality education. I've always said education is one thing that nobody can ever take away from you. So I certainly support that. I just think we have a different approach. My concerns with the state legislature and how they're handling it, they've funded, I don't want to incorrectly quote here, I think $47 million since 2007, somewhere in there, ballpark each. The problem I always have is it's always hinted and kind of sold as, well, you're going to have free preschool now. And that's could be further from the truth. The schools that have had to absorb the preschools have already started charging tuition. I have a concern that where there are good preschools, that once again, the government is going to come in and compete with private business. That's where you lose your competition. Education should be no different than any other business. We should have competition. It creates improvements. It gives parents choice.
All right, moving on. This next question comes from Terry Seehusen, Farm Bureau Regional Manager. Do you support the elimination of federal deductibility for state income tax purposes, and why? Tom.
Do you want to take a stab at that on how I would answer that? No. Here's the problem here is for the last at least 1 or 2 years, the Democratic majority down in the House and the Senate have tried to repeal or do away with federal deductibility from the Iowa tax code. In other words, they want you to pay a tax on a tax. It's even more extremely important this year because out in Washington, D.C., they want to let the Bush tax cuts expire. So if they let those tax cuts expire, plus they repeal federal deductibility, watch out for your tax bill next April.
Susan?
Well, it's my understanding that it doesn't change the amount you pay in taxes, and that the objection to it is that it makes us look unmarketable to other states, that they say, oh, Iowa has such a high income tax, and that it's more of a perception than an actual dollar.
Well, I guess I would like to respond that you can spend it any way you want to, but it is still a tax on a tax. And I was sure glad for our current state representative, Dolores Mertz, to have the strength and character to go against her own party and support that. Let me tell you how contentious this was with the Democrats. There was a public hearing held on federal deductibility in the Iowa House, and the gallery was full of citizens. You know, the Iowa Constitution says the doors to the House will always be open during public meetings. So the gallery was full of citizens down there to listen to this hearing. The Speaker of the House got angry at the crowd, and he sent the state troopers in to clear the crowd out of the gallery of the Iowa House. So in essence, we had the renter throwing the landlord out. That's tyranny. That's how much this issue is important to the Democrats and how they want to repeal it and have you pay a tax on a tax.
Well, I am unaware of that situation. I hadn't heard a thing about it. And so I guess I would like more information before I would form an opinion on that.
All right. Moving on. In July, at the Pocahontas County Fair, Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Bill Northey said the cost of ethanol production prior to the tax credit was below the cost of gasoline. He described the ethanol industry as mature and suggested that it may be time to shift the tax credit to other types of renewable fuel sources, such as switchgrass or other cellulosic sources. Do you agree with shifting the tax credit to other renewable fuel sources, and why? Susan?
I think it's too soon. I think that's something we might want to do in the future, but I think it's premature at this time to do that.
Tom?
I guess I'd have to see the viability of the other crops. I mean, we grow corn and beans here because they grow so well here. I don't know how well those crops grow here, what their yield is. I support renewable fuels. I support Iowa agriculture. That's what this state is all about. So, again, I guess I'd have to agree. Until there's more study on how viable those other crop sources are, I couldn't render an opinion.
Well, then let me ask this question, and I'll go back to you to start, Susan. Would you support increased tax credits or subsidies or other programs to encourage more cellulosic or switchgrass, other biofuel sources that still are in development?
Again, I would have to study it more. I just don't know enough about the question. But my inclination is we give the big oil companies all sorts of tax breaks. And, you know, I would just as soon have Iowans receive those tax breaks than the offshore drilling projects that spill oil into our ocean. So,
I guess I'd like to say I think this is another nonpartisan issue. Energy is a matter of national security, and this is something, and these are good questions, because this is something that we all need to sit down and have honest, open discussions on. When you talk about subsidies for farmers, I guess it depends if you're a farmer or if you're not a farmer. A lot of people want to criticize some of the subsidies. I find some of them are useful. I also want to say I don't think there should be any golden cows out there or golden calves. I think every program out there needs to be reviewed for its effectiveness, and I mean every program. So when it comes to renewable energy, we have to look at the windmills and the wind energy, and is the cost of putting that infrastructure in, the transmission lines, is that cost beneficial? How much energy are we going to get out of that? Versus are we going to spend more tax credits or shift some of those to the renewable crops? These things all need to be studied. I would say before we just jump in with both feet and shift everything, we need to learn more about it.
Okay, I'll move on. The next question also comes from a submitter who requested anonymity. As the cost of farming increases annually, it can appear financially impossible for a new farmer to begin operations. A program is in place to reward renting land to a beginning farmer through property tax credits. What other programs or ideas can be implemented to encourage or assist beginning farmers? Tom?
Are you trying to say that the price of land has went up? It's a little different than 1850 when you just threw your old plow on your Conestoga wagon, came out here and found a spot to break the soil. It is. Farming, even a small farm, it can be a multi-million-dollar operation. So, did you say that those credits are in place already, or is that proposed?
That would be what the submitter says, yes.
Propose some tax credits for land purchasing?
Yeah, the property tax credits are currently in
Okay.
place to help change that shift of ownership.
Sure. I
development on the land.
As a legislator, I think I could seriously take that under serious consideration. And as we talk about spending too, and a lot of the people that I have talked to, you have to remember we've got to keep this in the context of the state budget. We've got to keep our state budget low. So you may support tax credits for a particular thing, but if it doesn't work out in the budget, just like when you're sitting around your kitchen table, there's a lot of good ideas, but if the checkbook doesn't support